August 1st, 1999. A black Mazda sits abandoned in a quiet parking lot in Ozark, Alabama. The engine is cold, the doors are locked, but something feels wrong. When police pop the trunk, they find a nightmare. Two 17-year-old best friends, Beasley and Tracie Hawlett, shot to death, their lives stolen in the final days of summer, their futures erased in an instant. Who did this? Why were two innocent teenagers murdered and stuffed into a trunk like they were nothing? For 20 years, those questions haunted a small town. Families held vigils, detectives chased ghosts. The killer walked free, hidden in plain sight, believing they'd gotten away with it. But they didn't count on one thing: science. In 2019, a breakthrough in genetic genealogy would crack this case wide open, leading investigators to a suspect who'd been living among them the entire time. A man who thought he was untouchable. A man who was dead wrong. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss how cutting-edge technology finally caught a killer who thought he'd never be found. This is the story of Beasley and Tracie Hawlett. Before we talk about how they died, we need to talk about how they lived, because Beasley and Tracie Hawlett weren't just victims, they were daughters, best friends, teenagers with dreams, inside jokes, and their whole lives ahead of them. B, short for Janet. Beth was 17 years old in the summer of 1999. She had that kind of energy that lit up a room, quick to laugh, fiercely loyal, and always ready for an adventure. She was the kind of friend who'd drop everything if you needed her, the kind of daughter who made her parents proud just by being herself. B loved music. She loved driving around with the windows down, singing at the top of her lungs to whatever was on the radio. In 1999, that meant Britney Spears, Backstreet Boys, TLC, the soundtrack of a generation. She had plans, big plans. College, a career, maybe travel. The world felt wide open to her. And right by her side, always, was Tracie. Tracie Hawlett was also 17. Where B was outgoing and bold, Tracie was a little more reserved, thoughtful. But don't mistake quiet for weak. Tracie had a backbone of steel and a heart of gold. She was the kind of person who noticed when someone was hurting and knew exactly what to say to make it better. The two of them, inseparable. They'd been best friends for years, the kind of friendship where you don't even have to finish your sentences because the other person already knows what you're thinking. They had their own language, their own rituals. Friday nights meant cruising around town, stopping for fast food, talking about boys, dreams, and everything in between. That summer, the summer of 1999, was supposed to be special. It was their last summer before senior year. One more year of high school, and then the world was theirs. They were soaking it all in, making memories, living in that sweet spot between childhood and adulthood where everything feels possible. July 31st, 1999 started like any other summer day. B and Tracie had plans. A friend was throwing a birthday party in Ozark, a small town about 50 miles north of Dothan, where the girls lived. It wasn't a big trip, just an hour's drive up Highway 231. They'd done it before, no big deal. B's black Mazda was their ride. She loved that car. It represented freedom, independence, the ability to go wherever they wanted, whenever they wanted. That evening, the two girls climbed in, turned up the music, and hit the road. They were excited, laughing, singing along to the radio, making plans for the party, talking about who'd be there, what they'd wear, what the night would bring. They had no idea it would be their last drive together. They had no idea that someone was about to steal everything from them. As the sun started to set over rural Alabama, B and Tracie headed north on Highway 231, two best friends with their whole lives ahead of them. The road stretched out before them, lined with pine trees and farmland, the kind of drive where you can let your mind wander, where the world feels safe and familiar. But somewhere along that route, something went terribly, horribly wrong. We don't know exactly when it happened. We don't know the precise moment their night took a dark turn. But what we do know is this: B and Tracie never made it to that birthday party. Their friends waited. They checked their watches. They called C's pager. Remember, this was 1999, before everyone had cell phones. No response. They called Tracie's house. Nothing. At first, it was just confusion. Maybe they got lost. Maybe the car broke down. Maybe they decided to stop somewhere along the way. But as the hours ticked by, confusion turned to concern. And concern turned to fear. By the time the sun came up on August 1st, both families were frantic. B's parents had been up all night, calling everyone they could think of. Tracie's family was doing the same. Where were the girls? Why hadn't they called? This wasn't like them. They were responsible kids. They always checked in. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. And then, that morning, the call came. B's black Mazda had been found. It was sitting in a parking lot on Herring Avenue in Ozark, not far from the center of town. The car was locked, undamaged, just sitting there, like it had been carefully placed. But when police arrived and looked inside, their worst fears were confirmed. In the trunk of that black Mazda were Beasley and Tracie Hawlett. Both girls had been shot. Both were dead. Two best friends, two bright futures, gone. The news hit Dothan and Ozark like a freight train. Parents held their children a little tighter. Teenagers who thought they were invincible suddenly realized they weren't, and two families were shattered in ways that would never fully heal. Who could do something like this? Who could look at two innocent 17-year-old girls and decide their lives didn't matter? That question would haunt investigators for the next 20 years. But before we get to the investigation, we need to understand what happened that night. We need to walk through the timeline. We need to see how two girls on their way to a birthday party ended up dead in the trunk of a car. July 31st, 1999, early evening. Beasley and Tracie Hawlett climb into B's black Mazda in Dothan, Alabama. The sun is still up, casting that golden late afternoon glow across everything. It's hot, typical Alabama summer heat, but the girls don't care. They've got the windows down, the radio up, and a party to get to. The drive from Dothan to Ozark is straightforward. You take Highway 231 north for about 50 miles. It's a route locals know by heart. Farmland, pine trees, small towns with one stoplight. Nothing dangerous, nothing to worry about. B, and Tracie have made drives like this before. They're not scared. They're not nervous. They're just two teenagers heading to a friend's birthday party on a Saturday night. They tell their parents they'll be back later that evening. They promise to be safe. They promise to call if anything changes. And then they're gone, disappearing down the road in that black Mazda, music blaring, laughter trailing behind them. For a while, everything seems fine. But then the sun sets. The sky turns from orange to purple to black, and B, and Tracie don't show up at the party. At first, their friends don't think much of it. Maybe they're running late. Maybe they stopped for food. Maybe they got turned around. Ozark isn't a huge town, but if you're not familiar with it, it's easy to miss a turn. But then an hour passes. Then two. Someone tries B's pager. No response. Someone else calls Tracie's house. Her family hasn't heard from her. The party continues, but now there's an undercurrent of worry. Where are they? This isn't like them. B, and Tracie are responsible. They don't just disappear without saying something. By 10 p.m., the concern is real. By midnight, it's turned into fear. B's parents are awake, pacing their living room. They've called everyone they can think of. Friends, relatives, anyone who might know where the girls are. Nothing. No one has seen them. No one has heard from them. Tracie's family is doing the same thing. Calling, waiting, praying. In 1999, not every teenager has a cell phone. Pagers are common, but they're one-way communication. You can send a message, but you can't force someone to respond. You just have to wait and hope. But B, and Tracie aren't responding. The hours crawl by. Every time the phone rings, both families jump, hoping it's the girls calling to say they're okay, that the car broke down, that they're at a gas station somewhere waiting for a tow. But the calls never come. Where are you watching this from? Drop your location in the comments. As the night stretches into the early morning hours of August 1st, both families know something is horribly wrong. You can feel it in your gut, that sick, twisting sensation that tells you the world has shifted, that something terrible has happened and there's nothing you can do to stop it. J.B.'s father gets in his car and starts driving the route from Dothan to Ozark, scanning the sides of the road for any sign of the black Mazda. Maybe they had an accident. Maybe they're stranded somewhere. Maybe they need help. He drives slowly, eyes searching the darkness, looking for brake lights, for a car pulled over on the shoulder, for anything. He finds nothing. Tracie's parents are on the phone with local police, filing a missing persons report. The officers try to be reassuring. Teenagers sometimes lose track of time. They'll probably turn up in a few hours with a perfectly reasonable explanation. But deep down, everyone knows this is different. By the time the sun comes up on August 1st, neither family has slept. They're exhausted, terrified, clinging to hope, but preparing for the worst. And then, around mid-morning, the call comes. A black Mazda has been found in Ozark. J.B.'s parents feel a flicker of relief. The car's been found. That's good, right? That means the girls are okay. Maybe the car broke down and they're at a friend's house. Maybe they stayed the night somewhere and forgot to call. But that flicker of relief dies the moment they hear the rest. The car is in a parking lot on Herring Avenue. It's locked, and police are on the scene. Why would police be on the scene if the girls are okay? J.B.'s father races to Ozark. Tracie's family does the same. They need to see for themselves. They need to know what's happening. But by the time they arrive, the area is already cordoned off. Yellow crime scene tape surrounds the black Mazda. Police officers are everywhere. Detectives, forensic teams, cameras. The families are kept at a distance. They're not allowed near the car. And that's when they know. That's when the worst fear, the one they've been trying to push down all night, becomes reality. Something has happened to J.B. and Tracie. Something terrible. The officers approach the families with that look on their faces, the look that says, "I'm about to destroy your world, and there's nothing I can do to soften this." They confirm what the families already know in their hearts. J.B. Beasley and Tracie Hawlett are dead. Both girls were found in the trunk of the Mazda. Both had been shot. Both were gone. The screams that follow are the kind that rip through your soul, the kind that you never forget, the kind that echo through a small town and leave scars that never fully heal. Two families have just lost their daughters. Two best friends, inseparable in life, are now inseparable in death. And somewhere out there, a killer is walking free. August 1st, 1999, morning. The parking lot on Herring Avenue in Ozark, Alabama, is quiet. It's a Sunday morning. Most people are at church or sleeping in. The lot sits near a cluster of businesses, nothing fancy, just the kind of small-town commercial area you'd find in any rural Alabama town. And there, sitting alone in the middle of the lot, is a black Mazda. At first glance, there's nothing obviously wrong. The car isn't crashed, the windows aren't broken, it's just parked there, like someone left it and walked away. But something about it catches attention. It's been sitting there for hours. No one's come back for it. And in a small town like Ozark, people notice things like that. Someone calls the police. Officers arrive to check it out. Maybe it's stolen. Maybe it was abandoned after a joyride. Maybe the owner is nearby and just forgot where they parked. They approach the vehicle cautiously. The doors are locked. They peer through the windows. The interior looks undisturbed. No signs of a struggle. No blood. Nothing that screams, crime scene. But then one of the officers notices something. The trunk. There's a smell, faint but unmistakable. They pop the trunk. And that's when everything changes. Inside are two young women, teenagers. Both have been shot. Both are clearly deceased. The officers immediately call for backup. Within minutes, the scene is swarming with police, detectives, forensic teams. The parking lot is sealed off. Crime scene tape goes up. Cameras start clicking. This isn't just a tragedy. This is a double homicide. The victims are quickly identified. J. B. Beasley and Tracie Hawlett, both 17 years old, both from Dothan. The evidence tells a horrifying story. The girls weren't killed in the car. The lack of blood spatter inside the vehicle makes that clear. They were murdered somewhere else, somewhere we may never know, and then their bodies were placed in the trunk. This was deliberate, calculated. Someone shot these girls, moved their bodies, drove their car to this parking lot, locked it up, and walked away. Who does that? Who kills two innocent teenagers and then calmly disposes of them like they're nothing? Investigators start processing the scene immediately. Every inch of that Mazda is photographed, dusted for prints, searched for evidence. And they find something crucial: DNA. Biological evidence is recovered from the scene, evidence that doesn't belong to J, B, or Tracie. Evidence that belongs to someone else, someone who was in that car, someone who had contact with the victims. In 1999, DNA technology is still relatively new in criminal investigations. It's not like today, where you can run a sample through a database and get a hit in hours. Back then, DNA evidence is collected and stored, but without a suspect to compare it to, it's just a piece of the puzzle, waiting for the rest of the picture to come together. Still, investigators are hopeful. They have DNA. That's huge. If they can find a suspect, they can match it. They can prove who did this. But first, they need a suspect. News of the murders spreads through Ozark and Dothan like wildfire. Two teenage girls, shot and killed, their bodies found in a trunk. It's the kind of crime that shatters a community's sense of safety. Parents who let their kids roam freely suddenly pull them closer. Teenagers who thought they were invincible realize they're not. And everyone starts asking the same question: who could do something like this? Vigils are held, candles are lit. The high school where J.B. and Tracie were supposed to start their senior year in just a few weeks is draped in grief. Classmates sob in the hallways. Teachers struggle to find words of comfort. The funerals are packed. Hundreds of people show up to pay their respects, to say goodbye to two girls who should have had decades ahead of them. And through it all, the families are drowning in a pain that no parent should ever have to feel. If this story is hitting you hard, hit that like button and share it. These girls deserve to be remembered. But even as the community mourns, investigators are working around the clock. They have a crime scene. They have evidence. They have DNA. Now they need answers. Who killed J.B. Beasley and Tracie Hawlett? Why? And how do you catch a killer who's already disappeared into the shadows? The investigation is just beginning, and it's about to become one of the longest, most frustrating cold cases in Alabama history. August 1999, Ozark, Alabama. The investigation into the murders of J.B. Beasley and Tracie Hawlett kicks into high gear immediately. This isn't just another case for local law enforcement. This is personal. Two teenage girls from a neighboring town gunned down and dumped like trash. Everyone wants answers. Everyone wants justice. The Ozark Police Department, along with the Dale County Sheriff's Office and Alabama State investigators, form a task force. Detectives start working 18-hour days. Phones ring off the hook with tips. The community is terrified, angry, and desperate for someone to be held accountable. The first step is reconstructing the timeline. J, B, and Tracie left Dothan around early evening on July 31st. They were headed to a birthday party in Ozark. They never arrived. Their car was found the next morning in a parking lot on Herring Avenue, less than a mile from where the party was supposed to be. So what happened in between? Investigators start canvassing the area. They talk to everyone who lives or works near Herring Avenue. Did you see the black Mazda? Did you hear gunshots? Did you notice anything unusual Saturday night or early Sunday morning? Most people have nothing to offer. It was a quiet night. Nobody heard anything. Nobody saw anything. But a few witnesses come forward with small pieces of information. Someone remembers seeing the black Mazda driving through town Saturday night. The girls looked lost, like they were trying to find their way. That makes sense. Ozark isn't a big town, but if you're not familiar with it, the streets can be confusing, especially in the dark. Another witness recalls seeing the car parked in the lot late Saturday night, but they didn't think anything of it at the time. Just a parked car. Nothing suspicious. These details help, but they don't answer the big questions. Who killed the girls? Where were they killed? And why? Investigators turn their attention to the people in J.B. and Tracie's lives. They interview family members, friends, classmates, boyfriends, ex-boyfriends, teachers, co-workers, anyone who knew the girls, anyone who might have had a reason to hurt them. But nothing adds up. J, B, and Tracie weren't involved in anything dangerous. They weren't mixed up with drugs. They didn't have enemies. They were just normal teenagers living normal lives. So why were they targeted? One theory is that it was random, wrong place, wrong time. Maybe the girls stopped for gas or pulled over to ask for directions, and they encountered someone with evil intentions. Maybe it was a predator who saw an opportunity and took it. Another theory is that someone followed them from Dothan. Maybe someone had been watching them, waiting for the right moment. But without evidence, these are just theories. The forensic team continues processing the crime scene. They dust the car for fingerprints. They find several, but most belong to J, B, Tracie, or people who'd been in the car before, friends, family members. Nothing that points to a suspect. They examine the trunk where the bodies were found. They're looking for fibers, hairs, anything that might have been left behind by the killer. And then there's the DNA. Biological evidence recovered from the scene is sent to the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences for analysis. This is 1,999. Remember, DNA testing takes time. It's not instantaneous like it is today. Weeks go by, then months. Finally, the results come back. The DNA profile is clear. It belongs to a male. It doesn't match J, B, or Tracie. It doesn't match anyone in their immediate circle. This is the killer's DNA. It has to be. Investigators run it through CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System, the FBI's national DNA database. They're hoping for a hit. Hoping that whoever did this has been arrested before, that their DNA is already in the system. But there's no match. The killer isn't in the database. That means one of two things. Either the killer has never been arrested for a serious crime before, or they've managed to stay off law enforcement's radar entirely. It's a devastating blow, but investigators don't give up. They keep interviewing people. They follow up on every tip that comes in, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant. Someone calls in saying they saw a suspicious man near Herring Avenue that night. Detectives track him down, interview him, clear him. Someone else reports that they heard rumors about a local man with a violent history. Investigators look into it. Another dead end. Tip after tip, lead after lead, and every single one goes nowhere. What time is it where you are right now? Let me know in the comments. The families are desperate for progress. They meet with investigators regularly, asking for updates, pleading for answers. But there's only so much the detectives can tell them. We're doing everything we can. We're following every lead. We will find who did this. But as the months turn into a year, and then 2 years, the case starts to cool. It's not that investigators stop caring. It's not that they give up. But the reality is, without new evidence, without a suspect, there's only so much they can do. The DNA sits in evidence storage, a profile without a name, a killer without a face. Detectives move on to other cases. New crimes demand their attention. But the Beasley Hawlett case never fully leaves their minds. It's the one that got away, the one they couldn't solve. Files are boxed up and stored. The case officially goes cold, but the families refuse to let it die. J, B's parents, Tracie's parents, they become advocates. They keep the case in the public eye. They give interviews to local news stations. They organize vigils every year on the anniversary of the murders. They plaster missing person-style flyers around town, except these aren't missing persons. These are murdered girls, and the flyers are asking for information. Asking for anyone who knows anything to come forward. They offer rewards. They beg. They plead. Please, if you know something, say something. Help us find who did this. But the years keep passing, and the answers never come. Detectives retire. New ones take their place. The case file gets passed down like a tragic inheritance. Each new investigator reads through the reports, looks at the evidence, and comes to the same frustrating conclusion. We know who did this is out there. We have their DNA, but we don't know who they are. And without that final piece of the puzzle, the case remains unsolved. For 20 years, the killer walks free. For 20 years, two families live in agony, knowing that the person who destroyed their lives is still out there, living their life, maybe even sleeping peacefully at night. But science is evolving. Technology is advancing. And in 2019, everything is about to change. 20 years. Let that sink in for a moment. 20 years of waiting, 20 years of wondering, 20 years of living with a hole in your heart that never heals. For most of us, 20 years is a lifetime. It's graduating high school, going to college, getting married, having kids, building a career. It's watching your children grow up. It's birthdays and holidays and milestones. But for the families of J, B, Beasley and Tracie Hawlett, those 20 years were something else entirely. They were 2 decades of grief that never got closure, 2 decades of anger that had nowhere to go, 2 decades of hoping that today might be the day they finally get answers. Every August 1st, the families gathered, rain or shine, hot Alabama summer or the occasional cool morning. They met at the site where the girls' bodies were found, and they held a vigil. Candles, flowers, photos of J, B, and Tracie, smiling, frozen in time at 17 years old. The first vigil in 2000 drew hundreds of people. The community was still reeling, still raw from the loss. Everyone showed up to support the families, to show that they hadn't forgotten. But as the years went by, the crowds got smaller. That's not a criticism, it's just reality. Life moves on. People have their own struggles, their own tragedies. The world doesn't stop spinning just because 2 girls were murdered. But the families never stopped showing up. Year 2, Year 5, Year 10, Year 15. J, B's mother, aged before everyone's eyes. The vibrant woman she'd been in 1999 was replaced by someone who carried the weight of unspeakable loss. You could see it in her face, in the way she moved, in the way she spoke about her daughter in the past tense, even though in her heart, J, B, was still that 17-year-old girl with the bright smile and the whole world ahead of her. Tracie's parents were the same, hollowed out by grief, kept alive only by the hope, however faint, that one day someone would be held accountable. They never got to see their daughters graduate high school, never got to watch them walk across a stage in cap and gown, diploma in hand. They never got to see them go to college, never got to help them move into a dorm room, never got to send care packages during finals week. They never got to meet the people their daughters would have fallen in love with, never got to plan weddings, never got to walk them down the aisle. They never got to hold grandchildren, never got to see JB's eyes or Tracie's smile reflected in the face of a baby. All of that was stolen, ripped away in a single act of violence on a summer night in 1999. And the person who did it? They were out there somewhere, living their life. Maybe they had a family. Maybe they went to work every day, came home, had dinner, watched TV, went to bed. Maybe they thought about what they'd done. Maybe they didn't. But they were free, and that was the part that ate away at the families every single day. The case file sat in a storage room at the Ozark Police Department. Boxes of evidence, witness statements, crime scene photos. And that DNA sample, the one piece of evidence that could solve everything, if only they knew who it belonged to. Detectives came and went. Some retired, some moved to different departments, but every new investigator who inherited the case read through the files, looked at the evidence, and felt the same frustration. We know the killer's DNA. We just don't know who they are. In the early 2000s, there was hope that advances in DNA technology would crack the case. CODIS, the national DNA database, was growing. More and more offenders were being added to the system. Maybe, just maybe, the killer would get arrested for something else, their DNA would be entered into the database, and boom, a match. But it never happened. Years passed. The case remained cold. Then, in the late 2000s and early 2010 seconds, something started happening in the world of criminal investigations. Other cold cases, cases that had been unsolved for decades, were suddenly being cracked. You started hearing about it on the news. A murder from 1,975, solved. A rape from 1,986, suspect identified. Cases that everyone thought would never be solved were getting closure. How? Genetic genealogy. It was a new technique that combined traditional DNA analysis with public genealogy databases, the kind that people use to trace their family trees, to find out if they're 2% Irish or 15% Scandinavian, to connect with distant cousins they never knew existed. Investigators realized they could upload DNA from crime scenes to these databases, and even if the killer's DNA wasn't in the system, their relatives might be. From there, genealogists could build a family tree. They could narrow down branches. They could identify potential suspects. It was revolutionary. In 2018, the Golden State Killer, a man who terrorized California in the 1,970 seconds and 80 seconds, committing dozens of rapes and murders, was finally caught using genetic genealogy. He'd evaded capture for over 40 years, but science caught up with him. And suddenly, families with cold cases all over the country started wondering, could this work for us? The families of J.B. Beasley and Tracie Hawlett were no different. They reached out to investigators. They'd heard about genetic genealogy. They'd seen the success stories. Could this technique be used to solve their daughter's case? The Ozark Police Department and the Dale County District Attorney's Office started looking into it. They consulted with experts. They researched the process. They weighed the options. And in 2019, 20 years after the murders, they decided to try. The DNA sample from 1,999 was sent to Parabon Nanolabs, a company that specializes in genetic genealogy for law enforcement. The sample was uploaded to GEDmatch, a public genealogy database where people voluntarily share their DNA information. And then, the waiting began. Genealogists started building a family tree. They looked at DNA matches people who shared genetic markers with the unknown suspect. They traced lineages. They followed branches. They eliminated possibilities. It was painstaking work. It took weeks. But slowly, the tree started to take shape. And then, a name emerged. A name that made investigators' hearts stop. Coley Lewis McCraney. He was local. He lived in Ozark. In fact, he lived near Herring Avenue, near where the car had been found. He'd been there the whole time. For 20 years, he'd been living in the same town where he'd committed a double murder, walking the same streets, shopping at the same stores, maybe even attending the same vigils, hiding in plain sight. This case sat cold for 2 decades. If you want to see how it finally got solved, make sure you're subscribed and stay with me. Investigators started digging into McCraney's background. Who was he? What was his connection to J, B, and Tracie? Did he know them? Had they ever crossed paths? The more they learned, the more the pieces started falling into place. And the families who'd waited 20 years for this moment, were about to get the news they'd been praying for. Someone was finally going to be held accountable. But the journey wasn't over yet. An arrest was just the beginning. Now came the hard part, proving it in court. 20 years after J.B., Beasley, and Tracie Hawlett were murdered. The world of criminal investigation has changed dramatically since 1999. DNA technology that seemed like science fiction back then is now standard practice. Databases are bigger. Techniques are more sophisticated. And a brand new tool has emerged that's revolutionizing cold case investigations: genetic genealogy. To understand how this works, you need to understand how most people think about DNA in criminal cases. Traditionally, when investigators have DNA from a crime scene, they run it through CODIS, the FBI's combined DNA index system. CODIS contains DNA profiles from convicted offenders, arrestees, and unsolved crime scenes. If your DNA is in CODIS and it matches evidence from a crime, you're caught. But here's the problem. CODIS only works if the suspect's DNA is already in the system. If the person has never been arrested, never been convicted, never had their DNA collected by law enforcement, they're not in CODIS. And that means the DNA evidence just sits there, useless. That's what happened with the Beasley Hawlett case. Investigators had the killer's DNA. They'd had it since 1999, but it didn't match anyone in CODIS. So, for 20 years, it was just a profile without a name. Enter genetic genealogy. In the mid-2010 seconds, companies like 2, 3andMe, Ancestry.com, and others started offering consumer DNA testing. You spit in a tube, mail it off, and a few weeks later you get a report telling you about your ethnic background, potential health risks, and most importantly for our story, genetic relatives. These companies build massive databases of DNA profiles, and some of them, like GEDmatch, allow users to upload their DNA data and search for relatives in a public database. Here's where it gets interesting for law enforcement. Investigators realized they could upload DNA from crime scenes to these public databases. Even if the suspect's DNA wasn't in the database, their relatives might be. Think about it. You share DNA with your parents, your siblings, your cousins, your aunts and uncles. If your second cousin uploaded their DNA to GEDmatch to find out more about their family tree, that DNA could lead investigators to you. From there, genetic genealogists, specialists who understand both DNA and family trees, can start building a family tree. They look at the DNA matches. They trace lineages back through generations. They identify common ancestors, and then they work forward, following branches of the family tree until they narrow down potential suspects. It's like a puzzle. Each DNA match is a piece, and when you put enough pieces together, you start to see the picture. This technique made headlines in 2018 when it was used to catch the Golden State Killer, a serial rapist and murderer who'd terrorized California for decades. His arrest proved that genetic genealogy wasn't just theoretical, it worked. And it gave hope to families all over the country who'd been waiting years, even decades, for answers, including the families of J.B. Beasley and Tracie Hawlett. In early 2019, the Ozark Police Department and the Dale County District Attorney's Office made the decision to try genetic genealogy on the Beasley Hawlett case. The DNA sample from 1,999 carefully preserved in evidence storage for 2 decades was sent to Parabon Nanolabs, a company that specializes in DNA phenotyping and genetic genealogy for law enforcement. Parabon uploaded the DNA profile to GEDmatch. And then the work began. Genetic genealogists started analyzing the matches. They found distant relatives, people who shared small amounts of DNA with the unknown suspect, third cousins, fourth cousins, people who probably had no idea they were related to a killer. From there, the genealogists started building a family tree. They went back generations, identifying common ancestors. They used census records, birth certificates, marriage licenses, obituaries, any public record that could help them map out the family. It was slow, meticulous work, but gradually the tree took shape. And as they worked forward through the generations, the branches narrowed. They identified a family line that fit the DNA profile. Then they started looking at individuals in that line who would have been the right age in 1999, who would have been in Alabama, who would have had the opportunity. And one name kept coming up: Coley Lewis McCraney, born in 1973. That would have made him 26 years old in 1999. And here's the kicker. He lived in Ozark. Not just in Ozark, he lived near Herring Avenue, near where J.B.'s car had been found with the girls' bodies in the trunk. He'd been there the whole time. For 20 years, while families grieved, while investigators chased dead ends, while vigils were held and tears were shed, Coley McCraney had been living his life in the same small town where he'd committed murder. Investigators started digging into his background. McCraney was a truck driver, married, had children. By all outward appearances, he was just a regular guy, a neighbor, someone you'd see at the grocery store or the gas station and not think twice about. But now, genetic genealogy had put him in the crosshairs. Of course, a family tree isn't enough to arrest someone. Investigators needed to confirm that the DNA from the crime scene actually belonged to McCraney. So they did what's called a confirmation sample. They started surveilling McCraney. They waited for him to discard something in public, a coffee cup, a cigarette butt, anything that would have his DNA on it. And when they got it, they sent it to the lab for testing. The results came back. It was a match. The DNA from the 1,999 crime scene, the DNA that had been sitting in evidence for 20 years, belonged to Coley Lewis McCraney. What's the weather like where you are today? Sunny? Rainy? Drop it below. Investigators now had everything they needed. They had DNA evidence linking McCraney to the crime scene. They had his proximity to where the car was found. They had 20 years of preserved evidence ready to be presented in court. On March 16, 2019, Ozark police, along with the Dale County Sheriff's Office and Alabama state investigators, moved in. Coley McCraney was arrested at his home and charged with 2 counts of capital murder in the deaths of J.B. Beasley and Tracie Hawlett. The news hit the community like a shockwave. People who'd known McCraney for years couldn't believe it. He seemed so normal, so ordinary. How could he have done something so horrific? But the evidence didn't lie. For the families, the arrest was bittersweet. On one hand, after 20 years of waiting, someone was finally being held accountable. On the other hand, it didn't bring J.B. and Tracie back. It didn't erase 2 decades of pain. But it was something. It was justice, delayed but not denied. And it was proof that no matter how much time passes, no matter how well a killer thinks they've hidden, science has a way of catching up. Coley McCraney thought he'd gotten away with murder. He was wrong. The 16th of March, 2019, early morning, Coley Lewis McCraney wakes up in his home in Ozark, Alabama, probably thinking it's going to be just another ordinary day. He's 45 years old now, a truck driver, a husband, a father. To anyone looking from the outside, he's just a regular guy living a regular life in a small Alabama town. But today, his past is about to catch up with him. Police vehicles roll up to his house. Ozark police, Dale County Sheriff's deputies, Alabama state investigators. They've been planning this moment for weeks, ever since the DNA confirmation came back. They knock on the door. McCraney answers, and within minutes, he's in handcuffs. Coley Lewis McCraney, you're under arrest for the murders of J.B. Beasley and Tracie Hawlett. 2 names he probably hasn't heard spoken aloud in 20 years. 2 names that have haunted a community for 2 decades. 2 names that represent 2 lives he stole on a summer night in 1999. McCraney has read his rights and taken into custody. His family watches in shock and confusion. His neighbors stand on their porches, trying to figure out what's happening. Within hours, the news breaks. Local news stations interrupt regular programming. Breaking news. Arrest made in 1999 double homicide of J.B. Beasley and Tracie Hawlett. The community erupts. Social media explodes. People who've lived in Ozark their whole lives are stunned. Coley McCraney, the truck driver who lives down the street, the guy you'd wave to at the gas station, he's the one who killed those girls. For the families of J.B. and Tracie, the news is overwhelming. 20 years. 20 years of waiting, wondering, hoping, praying. And now, finally, someone is being held accountable. But the relief is mixed with a flood of other emotions: anger, grief, exhaustion. J.B.'s mother releases a statement. We never gave up hope. We knew this day would come. We just didn't know when. Tracie's family echoes the sentiment. They thank the investigators who never stopped working the case. They thank the advances in science that made this arrest possible. But they also make it clear, this doesn't bring their daughters back. Nothing ever will. So who is Coley Lewis McCraney? Investigators start piecing together his life, looking for connections to J.B. and Tracie, trying to understand why he did what he did. McCraney was born and raised in the Ozark area. In 1999, when the murders happened, he was 26 years old. He was living in Ozark, working various jobs, known around town but not particularly remarkable in any way. Here's what makes this case even more disturbing. McCraney lived near Herring Avenue, near the parking lot where J.B.'s car was found with the girls' bodies in the trunk. For 20 years, he'd been right there, walking past that parking lot, driving by it, maybe even thinking about what he'd done every time he saw it. Investigators dig deeper. Did McCraney know J.B. and Tracie? Was there a prior connection? As far as they can tell, no. There's no evidence that McCraney knew the girls before that night. No evidence that they'd ever met, ever spoken, ever crossed paths. Which makes this even more terrifying. This appears to have been a crime of opportunity. Two teenage girls, lost in an unfamiliar town, vulnerable, and a predator who saw an opportunity and took it. We may never know the exact sequence of events that night, but investigators believe McCraney encountered the girls somewhere in Ozark. Maybe they stopped to ask for directions. Maybe they pulled over because they were lost. Maybe McCraney approached them, offering to help. However it started, it ended with two girls dead and their bodies stuffed in a trunk. When McCraney is interrogated after his arrest, he makes a stunning admission. He acknowledges that he had sexual contact with both J, B, and Tracie, but he denies killing them. Let that sink in for a moment. His DNA was found at the crime scene. His DNA was on the victims. The evidence is overwhelming. And his explanation is that, yes, he had sexual contact with two 17-year-old girls, but no, he didn't kill them. It's an absurd defense, and investigators know it. Even if his claim of consensual contact were true, which is highly doubtful, given the circumstances, it doesn't explain how both girls ended up shot to death and placed in the trunk of their own car. It doesn't explain why he never came forward in 20 years, why he never said, "Hey, I was with those girls that night, but I didn't kill them." It doesn't explain why he let two families suffer for 2 decades, wondering who killed their daughters, while he stayed silent. The evidence against McCraney is damning. DNA evidence placing him at the scene, his proximity to where the car was found, his complete lack of a credible alibi or explanation. But investigators want to make sure the case is airtight. They go back through the original evidence from 1999. They re-interview witnesses. They build a timeline. And everything points to McCraney. The community is divided in its reaction. Some people who knew McCraney refuse to believe it. He was always so nice, so normal. There's no way he could have done this. But others aren't surprised. In hindsight, they remember things. Odd behavior, uncomfortable moments, things that didn't seem significant at the time but now take on new meaning. That's the thing about killers who hide in plain sight. They're often described as normal, quiet, kept to himself, because that's how they survive. That's how they avoid suspicion. McCraney had a family, he had a job, he had a life, and for 20 years he maintained that facade while carrying the secret of what he'd done. But DNA doesn't lie. Science doesn't forget. And in March 2019, Coley McCraney's double life came crashing down. He's held without bond. The charges are capital murder, meaning he could face the death penalty. The families, after 20 years of waiting, finally have a face to attach to their pain, a name, a person who will be held accountable. But the legal process is just beginning. An arrest is one thing, a conviction is another. McCraney hires a defense team. They start preparing for trial. And the families brace themselves for what comes next, reliving the worst moment of their lives in a courtroom, in front of a jury, with the man who destroyed their world sitting just feet away. Justice is within reach, but it's going to be a long, painful road to get there. March 2019, Coley McCraney is arrested. But the wheels of justice turn slowly. For the next 4 years, the case winds its way through the legal system. Pre-trial hearings, motions, delays. The kind of bureaucratic process that can feel agonizing when you've already waited 20 years for answers. The families attend every hearing. They sit in the courtroom, watching McCraney, studying his face, looking for some sign of remorse, some acknowledgement of what he's done. They see nothing. McCraney sits quietly, conferring with his attorneys, showing little emotion. He pleads not guilty to 2 counts of capital murder. His defense team argues that the DNA evidence, while placing him at the scene, doesn't prove he committed murder. They point to his claim of consensual contact with the girls. They suggest that someone else could have killed J, B, and Tracie after McCraney left. It's a thin argument, and everyone knows it. But in the American justice system, the prosecution has to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, and McCraney's attorneys are going to make them work for it. Finally, in 2023, 4 years after the arrest, 24 years after the murders, the case goes to trial. The Dale County Courthouse is packed. Media from across Alabama and beyond descend on Ozark. This is the trial everyone's been waiting for. The families of J. B. Beasley and Tracie Hawlett sit in the front row. They've waited nearly a quarter century for this moment. The prosecution lays out their case methodically, piece by piece. They present the timeline. July 31st, 1999. Two 17-year-old girls leave Dothan, heading to a birthday party in Ozark. They never arrive. The next morning, their bodies are found in the trunk of J.B.'s car. They present the crime scene evidence, photos of the black Mazda, the parking lot on Herring Avenue, the trunk where the girls were found. They present the DNA evidence, the biological material recovered from the scene in 1999, the genetic genealogy investigation in 2019 that led to McCraney, the confirmation sample that proved the DNA belonged to him. Expert witnesses testify about the science. They explain how DNA works, how genetic genealogy works, how the match was made. The odds of the DNA belonging to someone other than McCraney? Astronomical, billions to 1. The prosecution also presents testimony about McCraney's proximity to the crime scene. He lived near Herring Avenue. He was in the area. He had opportunity. And they hammer home the most damning point, McCraney's own admission that he had sexual contact with both girls. Even if you believe his claim that it was consensual, which strains credibility, given that both girls ended up dead, why didn't he come forward? Why didn't he tell police, "I was with them that night, but I didn't kill them"? Because he did kill them, and he knew it. The defense tries to poke holes in the prosecution's case. They question the reliability of genetic genealogy. They suggest the investigation was flawed. They argue that DNA evidence alone doesn't prove murder. But it's an uphill battle. The evidence is overwhelming, the science is sound, and the jury knows it. Witnesses testify about the impact of the murders. Friends of J.B. and Tracie take the stand, talking about the girls they knew, the futures that were stolen. Family members testify, their voices breaking as they describe 24 years of grief, of wondering, of waiting. J.B.'s mother takes the stand. She talks about her daughter, about the hole in her life that will never be filled, about the grandchildren she'll never have, about the milestones she'll never witness. Tracie's family does the same. The pain is raw, even after all these years. And through it all, McCraney sits at the defense table, largely expressionless. The trial lasts several weeks. Testimony, cross-examination, expert witnesses, evidence presentation. And then, finally, closing arguments. The prosecution delivers a powerful summation. They walk the jury through the evidence one more time, the DNA, the timeline, the lack of any credible alternative explanation. Coley McCraney murdered J.B. Beasley and Tracie Hawlett. The prosecutor says, the evidence proves it beyond any doubt, and after 24 years, it's time for him to be held accountable. The defense makes their final plea, reasonable doubt, gaps in the evidence, the possibility, however remote, that someone else was involved. But even they seem to know it's not enough. The jury deliberates. Hours pass. The families wait, barely breathing. And then, the verdict comes in. Guilty. Guilty on both counts of capital murder. The courtroom erupts. Not in celebration, this isn't a moment for celebration, but in a release of emotion that's been building for 24 years. J.B.'s mother collapses into the arms of family members, sobbing. Tracie's father buries his face in his hands. It's not joy, it's not relief, it's something more complicated. It's the knowledge that finally, justice has been served. McCraney shows little reaction. He's led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. Sentencing comes shortly after. The judge hands down the maximum, life in prison without the possibility of parole. Coley Lewis McCraney will spend the rest of his life behind bars. He will never walk free again. He will never see his family outside of a prison visiting room. He will never drive a truck, never go to a restaurant, never feel the sun on his face as a free man. And for the families of J.B. Beasley and Tracie Hawlett, That's as close to justice as they're going to get. 24 years. That's how long it took to bring Coley McCraney to justice for the murders of J.B. Beasley and Tracie Hawlett. 24 years of grief, of unanswered questions, of sleepless nights and endless wondering, of families who refused to give up, even when it seemed like the case would never be solved. But it was solved, and that matters. This case teaches us something important. Justice delayed is not justice denied. For 2 decades, it looked like McCraney had gotten away with murder. He lived his life, he went to work, he came home to his family. He walked the same streets where he'd committed an unspeakable crime, probably thinking he was safe, that too much time had passed, that he'd never be caught. But he was wrong. Because the families never stopped fighting, the investigators never stopped working, and science never stopped advancing. Genetic genealogy is revolutionizing cold case investigations across the country. Cases that sat unsolved for 30, 40, even 50 years are finally getting closure. Families who thought they'd never get answers are finally getting justice. And it's all because of DNA microscopic evidence that doesn't fade, doesn't forget, and doesn't lie. The Beasley Hawlett case is proof that no matter how much time passes, no matter how cold a case gets, there's always hope. Technology is evolving, databases are growing, and killers who thought they were safe are being caught. If you're a family member of an unsolved murder victim, don't give up. Keep pushing, keep advocating, keep your loved one's case in the public eye, because you never know when a breakthrough might come. But this case is about more than just science and investigation. It's about 2 girls who deserved so much more than they got. J.B. Beasley and Tracie Hawlett were 17 years old. They had dreams, they had plans, they had futures that should have included graduations, careers, marriages, children. All of that was stolen from them on a summer night in 1999. They should be in their early 40s now. They should be living full, rich lives. Instead, they're frozen in time, forever 17, remembered in photos and memories and the hearts of the people who loved them. Their families have shown incredible strength. For 24 years, they carried a burden that no parent should ever have to carry. They lived with the knowledge that their daughter's killer was out there somewhere, free, while they suffered. But they never gave up. They held vigils, they gave interviews, they kept the case alive when it would have been easier to let it fade into the background. And because of their perseverance, justice was finally served. This story also reminds us of the importance of DNA databases and genetic genealogy. Some people have privacy concerns about these technologies, and those concerns are valid. But the reality is, these tools are solving crimes. They're bringing closure to families. They're taking dangerous people off the streets. The balance between privacy and justice is a conversation worth having. But cases like this one show the incredible power of science when it's used for good. Coley McCraney is behind bars. He will never hurt anyone again. And while that doesn't bring J.B. and Tracie back, it does mean that their deaths weren't in vain. Their case helped prove that genetic genealogy works. It gave hope to other families with cold cases. It showed that killers can run, but they can't hide forever. So today, we remember J.B. Beasley and Tracie Hawlett, not as victims, but as the vibrant, loving, full-of-life young women they were. We remember their laughter, their friendship, their dreams, and we honor their memory by never forgetting that justice, no matter how long it takes, is always worth fighting for. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. These stories need to be told, and your support helps me continue bringing them to light. Drop a comment telling me what case you want me to cover next. Rest in peace, J.B. and Tracie. You are remembered, you are loved, and you finally have justice.